The morning sun blazed through the massive glass walls of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, casting long, geometric shadows across the polished terminal floors. Heat waves already shimmered on the tarmac outside, where aircraft taxied in an endless choreography of arrivals and departures. Inside Terminal F, the international concourse hummed with the controlled chaos of a Tuesday morning. Thousands of travelers flowing through security checkpoints, past duty-free shops, toward gates that promised destinations across the globe. The air conditioning fought valiantly against the Georgia summer pressing against every window, creating that particular airport atmosphere of recycled air and distant jet fuel. Lieutenant Sarah Collins walked with measured steps through the crowd, her K-9 partner Max padding silently at her side. The Belgian Malinois moved with the fluid grace of a predator, his dark eyes scanning faces and luggage with an intensity that belied his calm demeanor. They had been conducting routine sweeps since 6 in the morning, working their way methodically through the domestic terminals before crossing into the international section. So far, the day had been unremarkable, just another shift in the endless cycle of vigilance that kept the busiest airport in the world safe. Sarah adjusted her radio earpiece and checked her watch. 9:47. They would finish this sweep, grab coffee, and begin the whole process again. The monotony of routine was something she had learned to appreciate over the years. Monotony meant safety. Monotony meant no one was trying to blow anything up. Max stopped. The sudden halt was so abrupt that Sarah nearly stumbled. She looked down at her partner, recognizing instantly the change in his posture. His ears had rotated forward, his body had gone rigid, and his nose was pointed with laser precision toward something ahead. This was not casual interest. This was not a false positive triggered by someone's forgotten sandwich. This was the real thing. Sarah followed his gaze toward a row of public charging stations mounted against a pillar near Gate F8. Dozens of travelers sat in the surrounding chairs, most of them absorbed in their phones or laptops, cables snaking from their devices to the power outlets. Nothing looked out of place, nothing seemed wrong. But Max had not moved a muscle since he stopped, his entire being focused on that single location. She knelt beside him, keeping her voice low and steady. "Easy, boy. Show me." Max took 3 steps forward and sat directly in front of one particular outlet on the lower section of the charging station. His posture was textbook perfect, the trained indication that he had found something requiring immediate attention. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she leaned closer to examine what had triggered his alert. At first glance, it appeared to be an ordinary portable power bank, the kind sold in every airport convenience store. White plastic casing, USB ports, a small LED display. It was plugged into the outlet like 100 others throughout the terminal, seemingly forgotten by some distracted traveler. But something about it was wrong. The LED display was not showing a battery percentage. Instead, it displayed a countdown timer, green digits ticking backward with mechanical precision. 87 minutes and 43 seconds, 42, 41. Sarah's blood ran cold. She keyed her radio with a hand that remained remarkably steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "This is Collins, K-9 Unit, Terminal F, Gate F8. I have a suspicious device. Requesting immediate EOD response and supervisor notification. Initiating soft evacuation of immediate area." The response came within seconds, multiple voices overlapping as the airport's security apparatus lurched into motion. Sarah kept her eyes on the device while simultaneously beginning to clear the area around her. She approached the nearest travelers with calm authority, explaining that they needed to relocate to another gate area temporarily. Nothing to worry about, just a routine security measure. Most complied without question, gathering their belongings and shuffling away with the resigned acceptance of experienced flyers. A few grumbled about missing their flights, but no one argued with the uniformed officer and her intimidating K-9 partner. Within 5 minutes, a perimeter had been established around Gate F8. TSA officers materialized from seemingly nowhere, their presence helping to redirect foot traffic away from the area without creating obvious alarm. The last thing anyone wanted was panic. Panic in an airport was its own kind of disaster, capable of causing injuries and deaths, even without any explosive involved. Captain Marcus Webb arrived at a controlled jog, his face a mask of professional concern. He had been running airport security operations for 15 years and had seen more false alarms than he could count. But he had also seen the real thing, and something in Sarah's posture told him this was not a drill. "What do we have?" Sarah gestured toward the charging station without taking her eyes off it. Device disguised as a power bank. Digital countdown display showing approximately 85 minutes remaining. Max indicated on it hard. This is not a forgotten phone charger. Webb crouched beside her, studying the object with narrowed eyes. The timer continued its relentless descent. 84 minutes, 32 seconds. EOD is en route. ETA, 6 minutes. He straightened and began issuing orders into his own radio, coordinating with terminal management and the TSA command center. "We need to expand this perimeter and start thinking about full terminal evacuation, quietly. No announcements yet." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing through the implications. A device this sophisticated, placed in one of the busiest terminals in the world, was not the work of an amateur. Someone had planned this. Someone had studied the airport's security protocols and found a gap. And if they were smart enough to build this bomb, they might be smart enough to have planted others. "Max," she said softly, her partner's ears swiveling toward her voice. "We need to work. Full sweep." The Belgian Malinois rose from his seated position, instantly ready. Together, they began moving through the terminal, Max's nose working overtime as he sampled the air for any trace of the chemical signatures he had been trained to detect. Sarah kept one eye on her partner and one on the crowd, watching for anyone who seemed too interested in their activities, anyone who might be observing the chaos they had just initiated. The explosive ordnance disposal team arrived in their heavily armored vehicle, and parking as close to the terminal as regulations allowed. Technicians in blast suits began the careful process of approaching the device, their movements deliberate and methodical. Sarah watched from a distance as they deployed a portable X-ray unit, the images appearing on a tablet held by the team leader, Lieutenant Collins. The EOD commander's voice crackled through her earpiece. "You need to see this." She approached the command position they had established behind a concrete pillar, Max staying close at her heel. The tablet screen showed the internal structure of the device in ghostly detail. What she saw made her stomach drop. "That is not a simple IED," the commander said grimly. "We are looking at approximately 2 pounds of military-grade plastic explosive, sophisticated detonator system, and what appears to be a cellular backup trigger in addition to the timer. Someone knew what they were doing. Can you disarm it?" The commander's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. "We can try. But that cellular trigger complicates things. If whoever planted this is watching and sees us tampering with it, they could detonate remotely before we can neutralize the threat. We need to jam cell signals in this area, but that requires authorization from about 6 different agencies." Sarah turned to Webb. "Start making calls. We need that jamming equipment now." As Webb began working his phone, Sarah felt Max press against her leg. She looked down at her partner, reading the tension in his body. He wanted to keep working. He knew there was more to find, and she trusted his instincts more than she trusted any piece of technology or any human assessment. "Captain," she said, interrupting Webb's conversation, "I need to continue sweeping. If there is one device, there could be others. Max and I are going to work the rest of the international terminal. Webb covered his phone's microphone. "Take TSA backup with you. Report anything immediately. And Collins," he added, his voice dropping, "be careful. Whoever did this is still out there." Sarah moved through Terminal F with Max at her side, a pair of TSA officers trailing at a respectful distance. The terminal was beginning to show signs of disruption now. Passengers clustering in confused groups as gates were quietly closed and flights delayed. Rumors were spreading faster than official information, and she could see the anxiety building in people's faces as they scrolled through their phones, searching for news that had not yet been released. Max worked methodically, his nose sweeping back and forth as they passed shops, restaurants, seating areas and restrooms. He showed interest in several locations, pausing to investigate more closely, but each time he moved on without giving a full indication. False leads, distractions, the remnants of materials that were concerning but not immediately dangerous. They were approaching Gate F12 when Sarah's radio crackled with an update from the EOD team. The jamming equipment had been authorized and was being deployed. Specialists were beginning the delicate process of approaching the device for manual disarmament. Estimated time to neutralize was 30 minutes, assuming no complications. 30 minutes. The timer had shown 85 minutes when she first saw it. They were cutting it close, but it was manageable. The situation was being contained. That was when Max stopped again. This time the indication was different. Instead of focusing on a single point, he began moving in a tight circle, his nose working furiously, his body language suggesting confusion rather than certainty. Sarah watched him carefully, trying to interpret what he was telling her. Something was here, but it was not straightforward. Not a single source. She knelt beside him, scanning the immediate area. They were in front of a small electronics store that sold overpriced headphones and phone accessories to desperate travelers. The shop was currently empty, the staff having been evacuated along with everyone else. Through the glass storefront, she could see rows of products displayed on white shelving units, everything looking perfectly normal. Max pushed past her and pressed his nose against the base of the store's entrance, whining softly. Sarah felt ice form in her chest. She keyed her radio. Collins to command. "I need EOD secondary team to my location. Gate F12. Max is indicating on the electronics store entrance. Possible second device." The response was immediate and terse. "Copy that, Collins. Secondary team en route. Maintain distance." But Sarah was not looking at the store anymore. She was looking at Max, who had suddenly turned away from the entrance and was staring down the terminal corridor with an intensity she had rarely seen. His ears were pressed forward, his body trembling with barely contained energy. He had seen something, or smelled something, or sensed something that human perception could not detect. She followed his gaze and saw nothing unusual, just the empty corridor, the distant figures of security personnel, the abandoned shops and restaurants of an evacuated terminal. But Max never reacted like this without reason. "What is it, boy? What do you see?" And then she saw him, a man in airport maintenance coveralls, walking with studied casualness toward an emergency exit at the far end of the corridor. He was carrying a tool bag over one shoulder, his head slightly bowed, his pace just fast enough to suggest purpose without appearing rushed. Everything about him screamed normality, but Max had locked onto him like a missile acquiring its target. Sarah made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. She began moving down the corridor, her pace matching the man's, keeping enough distance to avoid spooking him while closing the gap steadily. Max stayed at her heel, silent and focused, every muscle in his body coiled for action. The man reached the emergency exit and pushed through without looking back. Sarah quickened her pace, reaching the door just as it began to swing closed. She caught it with her hand and slipped through into a concrete stairwell that smelled of dust and mechanical lubricant. Below her, she could hear footsteps descending rapidly. She keyed her radio while moving down the stairs. Collins in pursuit of possible suspect. White male, approximately 40 years old, maintenance uniform, heading down service stairs from Terminal F corridor, requesting backup to lower-level access points. The response was garbled, the concrete walls interfering with her signal. She was on her own, at least for the next few minutes. Max was already ahead of her, flowing down the stairs like water, his claws clicking softly on the metal steps. Sarah drew her service weapon and followed. The stairwell ended at a heavy metal door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." It was slightly ajar, a sliver of harsh fluorescent light visible through the gap. Sarah paused, listening. She could hear nothing from the other side, but that meant nothing. Silence could be an ambush waiting to happen. She pushed the door open with her shoulder, weapon raised, Max surging through ahead of her. They emerged into a vast underground corridor, the kind of utilitarian space that existed beneath every major airport, where baggage systems hummed and maintenance crews kept the machinery of travel running. The ceiling was low, crisscrossed with pipes and conduits. The lighting was harsh and unforgiving, and the man in the maintenance coveralls was 50 yards ahead, breaking into a run. Stop! Atlanta police! He did not stop. Sarah had not expected him to. She began running, Max already pulling ahead with the effortless speed that made Belgian Malinois the preferred breed for pursuit work. The man glanced back, saw the dog closing on him, and made a desperate turn into a side corridor. Sarah followed, her lungs burning, her legs pumping. The underground maze of Hartsfield-Jackson was vast and complex, a labyrinth of service tunnels and equipment rooms that stretched for miles beneath the terminals. If she lost him down here, they might never find him before whatever he had planned came to fruition. Max disappeared around the corner ahead of her. A moment later, she heard a man's scream, followed by the distinctive sounds of a struggle. She rounded the corner to find Max, with his jaws locked around the suspect's forearm, the man on his back, trying desperately to shake the dog loose. The tool bag had fallen open nearby, spilling its contents across the concrete floor. Sarah saw wires. She saw electronic components. She saw what looked very much like another timing device. "Do not move. Hands where I can see them." The man stopped struggling, though whether from compliance or exhaustion was unclear. Max maintained his grip, his eyes fixed on Sarah, waiting for the release command that would not come until she was certain the threat was contained. She approached carefully, kicking the tool bag further away, then pulling her handcuffs from her belt. Max, out. The Belgian Malinois released his grip and stepped back, positioning himself to intercept if the suspect tried to run again. Sarah rolled the man onto his stomach and secured his wrists behind his back, then patted him down for weapons. She found a folding knife, a cell phone, and a small remote control device that made her blood run cold. "What is this? What does this trigger?" The man laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You have no idea what you have stumbled into, officer. No idea at all." Sarah grabbed him by the collar and hauled him to a sitting position against the wall. She pulled out her phone and photographed his face, then sent it to the command center with a request for immediate identification. While she waited for a response, she examined the contents of the spilled tool bag more closely. There were enough components here to build at least 2 more devices identical to the one Max had found at the charging station. But more disturbing was the folder of printed documents tucked into a side pocket. She pulled it out and began flipping through the pages, her heart sinking with each one. Detailed schematics of the airport's HVAC system, maps of the underground tunnel network, flight schedules with specific aircraft highlighted, and most chilling of all, a list of names with employee ID numbers beside them. Former colleagues, she suspected. People who had wronged this man in some way, people he intended to make pay. Her phone buzzed with the identification results. Derek Simmons, age 43, former systems integration engineer for Delta Airlines, terminated 8 months ago following an investigation into workplace misconduct. Multiple complaints had been filed against him for threatening behavior. His security clearances had been revoked, but someone with his technical knowledge would know how to exploit the gaps in any system. Sarah looked at him with new understanding. "You worked here. You know every inch of this place." Simmons smiled, revealing teeth stained with blood from where he had bitten his tongue during the struggle with Max. "I built the systems that run this airport. I know things your security people cannot even imagine. And I know that your little dog finding my decoy does not change anything." Decoy. The word hit her like a physical blow. She grabbed his collar again, pulling his face close to hers. "What do you mean, decoy? What else have you done?" He just kept smiling. Sarah's radio finally crackled to life, the signal stronger now that she was away from the interference of the stairwell. The news was not good. EOD had successfully disarmed the device at the charging station, but a secondary sweep had revealed anomalies in the electronics store that required further investigation. And now there were reports of suspicious activity near one of the cargo hangars on the south side of the airport. She relayed her position and the capture of the suspect, requesting immediate backup to secure him and transport him for interrogation. Then she turned to Max, who was watching Simmons with unwavering attention. "We are not done," she said softly. "There is more out there." Max's ears perked forward. He knew. The backup team arrived within minutes, a pair of uniformed officers who took custody of Simmons with professional efficiency. Sarah briefed them on what she had found in the tool bag, emphasizing the remote trigger device and the need to get him into an interrogation room immediately. Every minute he stayed silent was a minute the airport remained at risk. She and Max headed for the cargo hangars. The journey took them through sections of the airport that most travelers never saw. Service roads clogged with baggage carts and fuel trucks, maintenance facilities where aircraft components were stored and repaired, and finally the sprawling complex of cargo hangars where freight from around the world was processed and sorted before being loaded onto aircraft. The suspicious activity report had come from a cargo handler who noticed someone entering Hangar 7 without proper authorization. Security cameras had captured a figure in maintenance coveralls, similar to Simmons, but the footage was grainy and inconclusive. It could have been anyone, or it could have been an accomplice. Sarah approached Hangar 7 with her weapon drawn, Max moving like a shadow at her side. The massive doors were partially open, revealing the dim interior filled with towering stacks of cargo containers and pallets. The smell of jet fuel and industrial lubricant hung heavy in the air. She paused at the entrance, letting her eyes adjust to the reduced light. Max's nose was working overtime, sampling the air for any trace of explosives or the scent of the man they had just captured. If Simmons had an accomplice, they might share certain chemical signatures from handling the same materials. The Belgian Malinois moved forward without prompting, weaving between cargo containers with silent purpose. Sarah followed, her senses hyper-alert, every shadow a potential threat. The hangar was enormous, easily capable of holding several aircraft, and the maze of stored freight created countless hiding spots. They were deep in the hangar when Max stopped. His indication was subtle this time, a slight stiffening of his body combined with a focused stare toward a stack of containers near the far wall. Sarah moved to a position where she could see what had caught his attention, her weapon tracking ahead of her. A man crouched beside one of the containers, his hands working on something attached to its base. He was dressed in the same maintenance coveralls as Simmons, but he was younger, his movements more frantic. When he heard Sarah's approach, he spun around, revealing a face twisted with fear and determination. "Do not move! Hands up! Now!" The man hesitated, his eyes darting between Sarah and the device he had been working on. She could see it now, another IED, larger than the one in the terminal, attached to a container marked with hazmat symbols. Whatever was inside that container, combining it with an explosion would be catastrophic. "Step away from the device." Do it now. The man's hand moved toward his pocket. Max launched himself before Sarah could give the command. 70 pounds of muscle and teeth covering the distance in a heartbeat. He hit the man in the chest, driving him backward and away from the device, his jaws finding the man's arm before he could reach whatever was in his pocket. The man screamed and went down hard, Max standing over him with a growl that seemed to vibrate the very air. Sarah rushed forward, kicking away the cell phone that had fallen from the man's pocket, then securing his hands behind his back with cable ties. She checked the device on the container, her heart pounding when she saw the timer display. 23 minutes. They had 23 minutes before this thing went off. Collins to command. Second device located in Hangar 7, attached to a hazmat container. Timer shows 23 minutes. I need EOD here now. The response was immediate, but concerning. All available EOD units were engaged with the situation in the terminal. A team would be dispatched as soon as one became available, but the ETA was uncertain. Sarah looked at the device, then at the man groaning on the floor beneath Max's watchful gaze. She was not trained in bomb disposal. Attempting to disarm it herself could trigger an immediate detonation. But if she did nothing, the explosion would not only destroy the hangar, but potentially spread whatever hazardous material was inside that container across a significant portion of the airport. She needed to buy time. She needed to get this container somewhere less catastrophic if the worst happened. The hangar had vehicle access. Large doors at the far end opened onto the tarmac, where aircraft taxied and took off in an endless cycle. If she could move the container outside, away from the terminal buildings, the blast might be contained to an area that could be evacuated. She spotted a forklift parked near the entrance and made her decision. Max, guard. Do not let him move. The Belgian Malinois took up position over the captured man, his eyes never wavering, his body language making it clear that any attempt to escape would be met with immediate and painful consequences. Sarah sprinted toward the forklift, praying that the keys were in the ignition. They were. Small mercies. She had operated forklifts during her brief stint in the army before joining the police force. The skills came back quickly, her hands remembering the controls as she guided the machine toward the container. The device was attached to the base, which meant she needed to lift the entire container and move it without disturbing the explosive mechanism. 18 minutes on the timer. The forklift's prongs slid beneath the pallet, supporting the container. Sarah raised it slowly, watching for any sign that the movement was affecting the device. The timer continued its countdown, unchanged. So far, so good. She began driving toward the large doors at the far end of the hangar, moving as fast as she dared with the heavy load. The container swayed slightly with each turn, and she forced herself to breathe, to stay calm, to focus on the task at hand. The doors were closed. She needed someone to open them. "Max! Come!" The Belgian Malinois abandoned his position over the captured man and raced toward her. Sarah shouted coordinates into her radio, hoping someone would hear, hoping backup was close enough to secure the suspect before he could escape. But right now, her priority was getting this bomb away from populated areas. Max reached the control panel for the hangar doors before she did, barking urgently. She jumped from the forklift, hit the button to open the doors, and was back in the driver's seat before they had fully retracted. 15 minutes. The tarmac stretched out before her, baking under the Georgia sun. In the distance, she could see aircraft lined up at their gates, passengers visible through windows, completely unaware of the drama unfolding nearby. To her right, a taxiway led toward the runway complex. To her left, a service road wound toward the perimeter fence. She turned left, pushing the forklift to its maximum speed, the container wobbling dangerously behind her. Max ran alongside, matching her pace, his tongue lolling, but his eyes still alert for danger. 12 minutes. The perimeter fence loomed ahead, a chain-link barrier topped with razor wire. Beyond it lay a buffer zone of grass and concrete, designed to provide clearance between airport operations and the surrounding neighborhoods. If she could get the container into that zone, the blast would be contained. It would still be devastating, but it would not take out a terminal full of people. She stopped the forklift near the fence and assessed her options. There was a service gate 50 yards to her right, but it was locked, and she did not have time to find someone with access. She would have to improvise. The forklift was not designed for breaking through fences, but physics was physics. She positioned the machine so the container would impact the chain link at its weakest point, where two sections joined together. Then she accelerated. The fence gave way with a shriek of tearing metal. The forklift lurched through the gap, the container scraping against the remains of the barrier, but staying intact. Sarah drove another 100 yards into the buffer zone before stopping. 9 minutes. She jumped from the forklift and ran, Max at her side. They needed to get as far from the blast zone as possible. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she kept running, putting distance between herself and the container with every stride. 7 minutes. She found shelter behind a concrete maintenance shed and pulled Max down beside her, wrapping her arms around him as if her body could somehow shield him from what was coming. The Belgian Malinois pressed against her, his heart pounding, his breath hot against her neck. 5 minutes. Sarah's radio crackled with updates she barely heard. EOD was en route. The second suspect had been recaptured by backup officers. The terminal evacuation was proceeding smoothly. All of it seemed distant, irrelevant, as she watched the timer in her mind tick down toward 0. 3 minutes. She thought about all the times Max had saved her life, all the dangers they had faced together, all the moments when his instincts had been the only thing standing between disaster and survival. If this was how it ended, at least they were together. 1 minute. She closed her eyes and held him tighter. The explosion, when it came, was both everything she had feared and less than she had imagined. A thunderous roar that shook the ground beneath her, a flash of heat that she felt even behind the concrete barrier, a cloud of debris that rose into the sky like an angry fist. But the maintenance shed held. The distance had been enough. They were alive. Sarah opened her eyes to find Max licking her face, his tail wagging with the simple joy of survival. She laughed, a sound that was half sob, and buried her face in his fur. Good boy. Good boy. They stayed like that for a long moment, human and K-9, survivors of something that should have killed them. Then Sarah's training took over, and she rose to assess the situation. The container was gone, vaporized in the blast, along with whatever hazardous material it had contained. The forklift was a twisted wreck of metal. The fence was destroyed for 100 yards in either direction. But the terminal, visible in the distance, stood untouched. The passengers in those aircraft, the workers in those buildings, the thousands of lives that had been at risk, they were safe. Her radio was filled with chaos now, multiple channels overlapping with updates and requests and confirmations. She filtered through the noise, picking out the relevant information. Both suspects were in custody. The devices in the terminal had been neutralized. The airport was being locked down for a full security sweep, and everyone wanted to know where the hell Lieutenant Collins had gone. She keyed her radio. Collins here. Situation contained at perimeter sector 7. Device detonated in controlled location. No casualties. Max and I are returning to the terminal. The walk back to the airport felt longer than the frantic drive away from it. Sarah's legs were shaking, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. Max stayed close, occasionally looking up at her with eyes that seemed to understand everything they had just been through. They passed through the destroyed fence, past the wreckage of the forklift, past the hangar where the second suspect had been captured. Emergency vehicles were everywhere now, their lights flashing in the harsh sunlight. Sarah saw Captain Webb running toward her, his face a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Collins, what the hell were you thinking? I was thinking that bomb was going to kill a lot of people if it went off in that hangar." She gestured toward the distant smoke plume rising from the buffer zone. "Now it just killed some grass and concrete." Webb shook his head, but there was admiration in his eyes despite his obvious frustration. "You could have been killed." Sarah looked down at Max, who was panting happily at her side. "I had backup." The next few hours were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and bureaucratic procedures. Sarah answered the same questions dozens of times for different agencies, each one needing their own official record of events. Max was checked by a veterinary specialist and declared fit for duty, though the vet recommended a day of rest, which Sarah intended to ignore if anything else happened. The two suspects, Derek Simmons and his accomplice, a former colleague named Ryan Weston, were being interrogated in separate rooms at the airport security complex. Sarah watched through one-way glass as FBI agents worked to extract information, the technical details of the plot slowly coming into focus. Simmons had been planning this attack for months, ever since his termination from Delta. He had recruited Weston, another disgruntled former employee, and together they had built a network of improvised explosive devices designed to strike multiple targets simultaneously. The charging station bomb had been meant as a diversion, drawing security resources, while the cargo hangar device released a cloud of toxic chemicals across the terminal complex. The hazmat container, it turned out, had contained industrial solvents used in aircraft maintenance. Combined with the explosive charge, it would have created a chemical cloud capable of causing mass casualties throughout the international terminal. Only Max's detection of the initial device and Sarah's pursuit of Simmons had disrupted the timeline enough to prevent disaster. Sarah finally escaped the debriefing room around 4 in the afternoon, her head pounding and her stomach reminding her that she had not eaten since before her shift began. Max walked beside her, equally exhausted but refusing to show it. They found a quiet corner of the security complex and collapsed onto a bench. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an energy bar, breaking off a piece for Max before taking a bite herself. The Belgian Malinois accepted the treat with dignified appreciation, his tail giving a single wag of acknowledgement. "You saved a lot of lives today," she told him quietly. "You know that, right?" Max looked at her with those deep brown eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom and loyalty in the world. He did not need praise or recognition. He had done his job, and his job was to protect. That was enough for him. Sarah leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. The chaos of the morning felt distant now, almost unreal. But the consequences were still unfolding, rippling outward through the airport and beyond. Flights were cancelled, passengers were stranded. News crews were gathering at the perimeter, hungry for details of the averted attack. The story would dominate the headlines for days. And somewhere in the interrogation rooms, Derek Simmons was still talking, still revealing the depths of his plan and the hatred that had driven him to conceive it. Sarah did not care about his motivations. She did not care about the psychological profile that experts would construct or the debates about workplace grievances that would fill opinion pages. She only cared that he had been stopped, that the people he had tried to kill were still alive. Her phone buzzed with a message from Webb. "FBI wants to talk to you again. Something about additional devices." Sarah sighed and rose to her feet. Max immediately followed, ready for whatever came next. They walked together through the corridors of the security complex, past officers and agents who nodded with respect as they passed. Word had spread about the K-9 unit that had detected the first device, pursued the bomber through the underground tunnels, and driven a forklift full of explosives through a perimeter fence to save the terminal. The FBI briefing room was crowded with personnel from half a dozen agencies. Sarah found a seat near the back, Max settling at her feet with practiced ease. The lead agent, a woman named Chen with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, was pointing to a map of the airport projected on the screen. Based on information obtained from the suspects, we believe there may be additional devices that have not yet been located. Simmons indicated that the original plan involved 4 simultaneous detonations at different locations throughout the airport complex. We have accounted for 3, the charging station in Terminal F, the cargo hangar device, and a 3rd that was found in a maintenance closet near baggage claim, which was disarmed this morning. That leaves 1 unaccounted for. Sarah felt a chill run through her. Where? That is what we need to determine. Agent Chen's eyes found her in the crowd. Lieutenant Collins, you and your K-9 partner have proven remarkably effective today. I'm requesting that you lead the search team for the remaining device. We will provide full support and resources, but we need someone who knows this airport and has demonstrated the ability to find what others miss. Sarah looked down at Max, who raised his head at the sound of his handler's attention shifting. The Belgian Malinois was tired. She was tired. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest. But somewhere in this airport, a bomb was waiting to explode. We will do it. The search began immediately, a coordinated effort involving TSA officers, FBI agents, and local police. Sarah and Max took point, working through sections of the airport that had been cleared during the initial evacuation. The domestic terminals first, then the ground transportation center, then the administrative offices and maintenance facilities. Hour after hour, they walked and searched and sniffed and examined. Max's nose never stopped working, sampling the air for any trace of the explosive compounds they had encountered in the earlier devices. Sarah watched his reactions carefully, looking for any indication, any sign that they were getting close. The sun set over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink visible through the terminal windows. The airport remained closed, thousands of stranded passengers housed in hotels and makeshift shelters throughout the city. The economic impact was already being calculated in the millions. But no one was talking about reopening until the final device was found. They were in the basement of the main terminal, working through a warren of storage rooms and equipment closets, when Max finally stopped. The indication was strong, his entire body going rigid as he faced a locked door marked electrical systems, authorized personnel only. Sarah felt her pulse quicken as she radioed for EOD support and a key to the door. The wait felt eternal, though it was only minutes. When the door finally opened, Sarah let Max take the lead, his nose guiding them through racks of electrical panels and bundles of cables toward the far corner of the room. There, tucked behind a junction box, was the final device. It was larger than the others, more sophisticated, with multiple timing mechanisms and what appeared to be a fail-safe trigger connected to the building's electrical system. If the power had been cut during the evacuation, it would have detonated automatically. Only the decision to keep essential systems running had prevented disaster. EOD moved in with their equipment, beginning the delicate process of neutralization. Sarah and Max retreated to a safe distance, watching the experts work with a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Until the device was disarmed, nothing was certain. The process took nearly an hour. The fail-safe triggers had to be bypassed one by one, each step carrying the risk of triggering the next. Sarah watched the technicians work with steady hands and calm voices, their training keeping them focused even as the stakes could not have been higher. And then it was done. Device neutralized, the EOD commander announced over the radio. All clear. The cheer that went up through the airport complex was audible even in the basement. Sarah heard it echoing through the corridors. The release of tension that had been building since Max first stopped at that charging station 12 hours ago. She looked down at her partner, who was watching the celebration with quiet satisfaction. "We did it, boy. We got them all." Max's tail wagged once, a simple acknowledgement of a job completed. Then he lay down at her feet and closed his eyes, finally allowing himself to rest. Sarah sat beside him, her back against the cool concrete wall, and let her own exhaustion wash over her. The investigation would continue for weeks. The interrogations, the evidence analysis, the reports and briefings and media appearances that always followed events like this. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that the airport was safe. The people who had been targets of a madman's revenge were going home to their families. And a Belgian Malinois named Max had proven once again why K-9 units were the most valuable resource in any security operation. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, feeling his warmth against her leg. "Good boy, Max. You're the best partner anyone could ask for." He opened one eye briefly, gave her a look that seemed to say, "obviously," and went back to sleep. The night passed in a series of procedures and protocols. Sarah and Max were examined again by medical personnel, debriefed again by investigators, and finally released around 3 in the morning, with orders to return for additional questioning later that day. She drove through the empty streets of Atlanta with Max dozing in the passenger seat, the city quiet and peaceful in the hours before dawn. Her apartment was dark and welcoming when she arrived. She fed Max his dinner, which he attacked with enthusiasm despite the late hour, then collapsed onto her bed without bothering to change out of her uniform. Sleep came immediately, deep and dreamless. The ringing phone woke her at 9 in the morning. She fumbled for it, her body protesting every movement. "Collins. Lieutenant, this is Agent Chen. I apologize for the early call, but there has been a development you should know about." Sarah sat up, instantly alert. What kind of development? During his interrogation overnight, Derek Simmons revealed additional information about his planning process. He mentioned that he had been monitoring Atlanta PD communications for months, learning patrol patterns and response protocols. He specifically mentioned you by name. He knew about your reputation with the K-9 unit. He built his device placement strategy around avoiding your usual routes. Sarah felt cold despite the morning warmth. He was tracking me, not physically, as far as we can tell, but he was aware of you. He considered you the biggest threat to his plan. That is why the charging station device was placed in Terminal F, an area outside your normal sweep pattern. He thought you would not find it, but Max found it anyway. Yes. Agent Chen's voice carried a note of admiration. Your dog found it anyway. Simmons did not account for the capabilities of a trained K-9. He underestimated both of you. Sarah looked across the room to where Max lay on his bed, watching her with those intelligent eyes. Even the man who had planned every detail of his attack had not anticipated what this dog could do. "There is one more thing," Chen continued. "We found evidence that Simmons had been planning this attack for over a year. He started building the devices in his garage 6 months ago, and Lieutenant, he kept detailed records of everything, including his selection criteria for targets. Let me guess, people who testified against him during the misconduct investigation. No, actually, his targets were random. He did not care who specifically died. He just wanted the airport to suffer the way he believed he had suffered. The scale of casualties was the goal, not the identity of victims. The randomness of it somehow made it worse. Simmons had not been seeking revenge against specific people. He had just wanted to watch the world burn. "We will need you back at the airport this afternoon for follow-up interviews," Chen said. "Can you be there by 2? "We will be there." She hung up and lay back against her pillows, staring at the ceiling. Max rose from his bed and padded over, jumping up beside her and resting his head on her stomach. She stroked his fur absently, processing everything she had learned. Derek Simmons had spent a year planning his attack. He had studied the airport's security systems, monitored police communications, placed his devices with calculated precision. He had accounted for every variable except one. He had not accounted for a Belgian Malinois with an impossible nose and an unwavering dedication to his job. You ruined his plan. she told Max softly. "A year of work, and you destroyed it in 30 seconds by deciding to sniff a power outlet." Max's tail thumped against the bed. He had no way of understanding the magnitude of what he had done. To him, it was just another day of work. Find the bad smell, alert the handler, get a treat. The simplicity of his perspective was both humbling and reassuring. The rest of the morning passed in a quiet routine. Sarah showered and changed into fresh clothes, made breakfast for both herself and Max, and caught up on the news coverage of the previous day's events. Every channel was running the story, with dramatic footage of the evacuation and expert analysis of the averted attack. She saw her own name mentioned several times, along with references to the K-9 unit that had made the initial detection. The phone rang again around noon. This time it was Captain Webb. "Collins, how are you holding up? I have been better, but I have been worse too. The chief wants to do a press conference at 3. He wants you and Max there. The mayor's office is pushing for it. Good publicity after a potential disaster shows the department in a positive light." Sarah grimaced. Press conferences were not her favorite part of the job, but she understood the necessity. The public needed reassurance that their airport was safe, and the best way to provide that was to put a face on the heroes who had saved it. "We will be there." She arrived at the airport security complex at 1:30, Max walking proudly at her side. The building was still buzzing with activity. Agents and officers from multiple agencies working to tie up the loose ends of the investigation. She nodded to familiar faces as she made her way to the conference room, where Agent Chen was waiting. The follow-up interview was thorough, but not adversarial. Chen walked her through every moment of the previous day, recording her responses for the official record. Sarah answered each question carefully, knowing that her words would become part of the permanent documentation of the incident. When they were finished, Chen closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that your actions yesterday prevented what would have been one of the deadliest domestic attacks since September 11th. The FBI, the TSA, and every other agency involved in this investigation owes you and your partner a debt of gratitude. We were just doing our job. That is what heroes always say." Chen smiled, a rare expression that softened her sharp features. "But we both know it was more than that. The forklift through the fence? That was not in any training manual I have ever read." Sarah shrugged. It seemed like a good idea at the time. The press conference was held in the main terminal, which had been reopened to limited operations earlier that morning. A podium had been set up near the arrivals area, flanked by flags and backed by a row of officials, including the mayor, the police chief, the head of TSA operations, and representatives from the FBI. Sarah stood to the side with Max, feeling uncomfortable under the glare of camera lights. The speeches were predictable, praise for the multi-agency cooperation that had prevented disaster. Gratitude to the passengers and staff who had cooperated with the evacuation, promises of enhanced security measures, and continued vigilance. Sarah listened with half an ear, watching Max, who was handling the attention with characteristic calm. When it was her turn to speak, she kept it brief. Max detected the initial device. We pursued the suspects and located the secondary devices. Every officer and agent involved did their job, and because of that, no one was hurt. That is what matters. She stepped back from the podium, ignoring the shouted questions from reporters. The chief gave her a subtle nod of approval. She had said enough. After the press conference, Sarah found herself surrounded by well-wishers and colleagues offering congratulations. She accepted their words graciously, but kept moving, seeking an escape from the overwhelming attention. Max stayed close, sensing her discomfort. She finally found refuge in a quiet corner of the terminal, near a window overlooking the tarmac. Aircraft were moving again, the normal rhythm of arrivals and departures slowly resuming. Life was returning to normal. "Lieutenant Collins?" She turned to find a man in a rumpled suit approaching. his press credentials hanging from a lanyard around his neck. He was older than most of the reporters she had seen, with grey at his temples and tired eyes. "I'm not giving interviews," she said flatly. "I'm not asking for one." The man stopped a few feet away, keeping a respectful distance. "I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter was on a flight that was supposed to leave from Terminal F yesterday, Gate F11. She was already at the gate when the evacuation started." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. "Is she okay?" "She is fine, scared, but fine. She is 22, just started her first job, was flying to New York for training." The man's voice cracked slightly. "If that bomb had gone off while she was there, I do not know what I would have done." Sarah did not know what to say. She had saved countless lives yesterday, but it was an abstract number, a statistic. This was the first time she had come face to face with someone directly affected. "Your daughter was lucky. A lot of people were lucky yesterday." The man nodded, wiping at his eyes. "I know you said no interviews, but if you ever change your mind, I would love to tell this story, the real story, not the politics and the press releases, but what actually happened. How a dog and his handler stopped a man from killing thousands of people." He pressed a business card into her hand and walked away before she could respond. Sarah looked down at the card. "James Morrison, Senior Correspondent, Atlanta Journal-Constitution." She tucked it into her pocket and turned back to the window. Max pressed against her leg, and she rested her hand on his head. "We made a difference," she said quietly. "Whatever happens next, we made a difference." The days following the attack blurred together in a haze of investigations, interviews, and administrative duties. Sarah and Max were temporarily assigned to light duty while the airport situation was resolved, which meant paperwork and more paperwork. She hated being desk-bound, but she understood the necessity. Derek Simmons and Ryan Weston were both charged with multiple federal counts including attempted murder, domestic terrorism, and conspiracy. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and both were being held without bail pending trial. Legal experts predicted life sentences for both men. The airport implemented new security protocols based on lessons learned from the attack. Additional K-9 units were assigned to patrol the terminals. Charging stations were modified to prevent concealment of devices. Underground access points were reinforced with additional monitoring systems. The changes would not prevent every possible attack, but they would make the next one harder to execute. Sarah finally returned to full duty 2 weeks after the incident. Her first shift back felt strange, walking the same corridors where she had chased Simmons, passing the same charging station where Max had made his initial detection. The physical evidence of the attack had been cleaned away, but she could still see it in her mind, clear as the day it happened. Max, on the other hand, showed no sign of trauma or hesitation. He worked the terminals with his usual dedication, nose sweeping for threats, eyes alert for anything out of place. To him, the attack was simply another day of work, filed away in whatever mental archive dogs kept for such things. They were working the domestic terminal on a Friday afternoon when Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from the reporter, James Morrison. He had been persistent over the past 2 weeks, reaching out periodically to ask if she had reconsidered the interview. She had ignored each message, but something about this one caught her attention. "I am at Gate C12. There is something I think you should see. No cameras, no recorder, just come." Against her better judgment, she made her way to the gate. Morrison was standing near the window, watching aircraft taxi on the runway. When he saw her approach, he smiled. "Thank you for coming. This better not be a trick." "It is not." He gestured toward the window. "Do you see that aircraft? The one with the red tail?" Sarah looked. A commercial jet was being pushed back from the gate, preparing for departure. "What about it?" "That is Delta Flight 2847 to New York. My daughter is on it." Same flight she was supposed to take the day of the attack. She was terrified to come back to the airport, but she did it anyway. She said she refused to let fear control her life. Sarah watched the aircraft begin its taxi toward the runway. Good for her. Morrison turned to face her directly. "Lieutenant, I have covered a lot of stories in my career. Wars, disasters, scandals. But this one is different. This one shows what people are capable of when they refuse to give up. I want to tell that story. Not the bomb, not the politics. The story of a woman and a dog who decided that giving up was not an option." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the aircraft disappear in the distance. Finally, she spoke. "If I do this interview, there are conditions. You tell the whole story, not just the dramatic parts. You tell people about the K-9 program, about what these dogs can do, about why they matter. You tell them that Max is not special because he is exceptional. He is special because he represents thousands of working dogs across the country who do the same thing every day without recognition." Morrison nodded. "I can do that. And you do not sensationalize it. You do not make me into some kind of superhero. I did my job. That is all." "Understood." Sarah looked down at Max, who was watching the exchange with patient attention. "What do you think, boy? Should we tell our story?" Max's tail wagged once. "Fine." Sarah turned back to Morrison. "Call my office Monday. We will set something up." The interview was published 2 weeks later. A long-form piece that occupied the entire front section of the newspaper's Sunday edition. Morrison had kept his word, telling the story without sensationalism, focusing on the partnership between handler and dog that had made the detection possible. He included sections on the K-9 training program, interviews with other handlers, and data on the effectiveness of K-9 units in security operations. The response was overwhelming. Sarah's inbox filled with messages from readers, from fellow officers, from K-9 handlers across the country sharing their own stories. The department received a surge of applications to the K-9 unit. Donations poured into the police foundation earmarked for K-9 operations. But the response that meant the most came in an unexpected form. Sarah was leaving the station after her shift when she noticed a small gathering near the K-9 kennels. Officers and staff were clustered around something, their phones out, taking pictures and videos. She pushed through the crowd to see what had caused the commotion. In the center of the gathering, a bronze statue was being installed on a newly constructed pedestal. The statue depicted a Belgian Malinois in full alert posture, ears forward, body tense, nose pointed toward some invisible threat. The craftsmanship was exquisite, capturing the power and grace that defined the breed. At the base of the pedestal, a plaque read, "In honor of K-9 Max and all working dogs who serve and protect." Sarah stared at the statue, speechless. She felt a presence beside her and looked down to find Max studying his bronze counterpart with what appeared to be mild interest. "They made that for you," she told him quietly. Max looked up at her, then back at the statue, then apparently decided he was more interested in dinner than artistic tributes. He tugged at his leash, ready to go home. Sarah laughed, wiping at eyes that had suddenly become blurry. "Come on, hero, let us get you fed." They walked together into the fading light of an Atlanta evening, handler and dog, partners in everything. Behind them, the statue stood as permanent testament to a day when disaster had been averted by the simple, extraordinary act of a dog doing what he had been trained to do. And somewhere in a federal detention facility, Derek Simmons sat alone in his cell, knowing that all his planning, all his hatred, all his carefully constructed revenge had been undone by an animal he had dismissed as irrelevant. The airport was safe. The city was safe, and Sarah Collins and K-9 Max were already looking forward to tomorrow, to the next patrol, to the next opportunity to protect and serve. Because that was what they did. That was who they were. Partners.